Thank you all so much for coming to Driving Change. It means the world to all of us, and we hope that you're really getting a lot of useful information. And we really are hoping to drive change through all this conference, which is why we're here. And we're lucky to have Women in Music with us today, and along with some of their friends. But just to kind of get started in terms of questions and how it's going to go, there is a chat feature, so there is no Q&A on this side. So if you can go ahead, if you have any questions for the panel, go ahead and click that chat button and go ahead and type your question and put a Q and colon in it. So that way we can kind of pull that out a little bit easier. Also, if you go to the participant section, there should be a button called raise hand, and it shows a little blue flag for us in the little blue hand. And we may get to audio questions, we may not, just forewarning, but we're gonna try our best to get to as many questions as possible. And other than that, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it off to Nicole. Hey, Nicole.
Thanks so much, JJ. Thank you for having us, Music Biz. I was just saying to JJ, we just adore working with everyone on the Music Biz team. You guys are so supportive and have been so supportive of WIM for so long. We did our first event at Music Biz, I think 5 or 6 years ago, when I was still hearing from other conferences that women in music events wouldn't be well attended. Music Biz was there to support, and we've been so excited to grow and grow year after year with you guys. A little background on Women in Music for anyone who doesn't know about the organization. We are a 501c3 nonprofit founded in 1985 in New York, and we've grown to encompass chapters all over the world, from LA to India now. With thousands of members and volunteers around the world. So we're so excited to be here. We launched our Diversity and Inclusion Council last year, shortly after we presented at Mondo Conference in New York. Camila was there moderating for us then, and I turned to her after the panel and I said, okay, where do we go from here? How do we kind of put this work into action? And she said, you start a council and get more people involved with more diverse and inclusive voices, so that you can kind of grow and learn about what you need to do within the organization and hopefully help impact the industry at large. So we did that, and Chissy and Kemra, who spoke on that panel, blew me away and inspired me, and I asked her to come and join us, so she did, thankfully. And we launched the D&I Council last December, and we roped in Nikisha, who is here today with us as well, to co-chair that council, and it's grown. Maria is now on the council as well, and we have Brooke Raskoff and Iris Caprari and a bunch of other amazing, amazing people leading the charge for us at Women in Music. And Nikisha actually was one of the people who first inspired us at WIM to really go outside of the gender equity bubble that we had been focusing on. She spoke at a panel at South by Southwest in 2019 that Tiana Lewis put together called Black Women in Entertainment, the Necessary Voice. And at that panel, I was like in the front row. Moira McCarthy, our vice president, told me about it, and we went to listen. And that's when I realized that as a woman in music who saw myself as an advocate for women in music, I had really just missed that there were so many more diverse and less heard voices and experiences of women under that umbrella. And we really needed to focus attention outside of the more whitewashed female voice that we tend to focus on. So we launched the council, and in the last year, we even, despite the pandemic, we have been able to program some incredible content, from disability awareness to Black Voices to Pride Panel, Hispanic Heritage Month with SiriusXM, just a variety of really impactful content that we hope will inspire people to kind of see an example of what they want to be, and that there are these places in the industry for diverse and inclusive voices, and that we really advance women outside of that kind of entry middle management level into the leadership position, so that we can make decisions day to day in the industry that represent more diverse audiences. So with that conversation last year about diversity and inclusion, This year, we want to talk about what does it actually mean in the music business. We have some guests with us outside of the music industry to bring experience and expertise from corporate America that has actual like benchmarks for these things that we don't really set in music. And what does it mean to actually craft a workplace culture? So rather than checking boxes of diversity, how do we create a culture where everyone feels included in your workplace, that they feel seen and heard, and that they really feel supported and empowered to thrive. So I would love to introduce our roundtable. We're just going to talk really openly and kind of anecdotally from our own experience, what we see day to day, what we want to see, and what demands we want to make of the music industry going forward on how we're going to make this a more inclusive environment. So I would love for everyone, I'm going to like let you introduce yourselves and tell us maybe a few identifiers of how you identify. I'm Nicole Barcelona. I'm the president of Women in Music. I'm an artist manager. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I'm a daughter. And I'm an advocate. And Camilla, you want to kick us off?
Thanks so much, Nicole. Happy to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm Camilla Benjamin Fuller, and I am a mom. I'll start with that because I have an 11-year-old that just got out of tutoring and is not happy that I made her do that after a full day of school. So there may be some drama on the side. I also identify as queer and a single mom and Afro-Caribbean American, and I've been passionate about issues of inclusion in music for quite some time. Nicole was one of the early folks to support work that I did in the Boston area to highlight the voices and stories and experiences of women and non-binary folks in rock specifically. When I'm not doing all of those other things, I'm the Chief Diversity Officer and lead for corporate social responsibility at a company called Parametric Technology. They do virtual and augmented reality, mostly business to business. And right before that, I was at TripAdvisor for 3 years and brought in to build their equity, diversity, and inclusion program. So happy to be with you all today.
Thanks, Camila. Nikisha, you want to tell us who you are and what you do?
Hi, guys. I'm Nikisha Bailey. As Nicole mentioned, I serve as co-chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Council for Women in Music. I also serve as vice president of A&R operations for Artist Partner Group, which is a label and a publishing company. And I'm also a governor of the Recording Academy. I identify as a Black woman in music on the executive level. I like to think, for me, I feel like inclusion and diversity, I'm kind of someone who's like seen the full gamut. I started off as an intern at Atlantic 10 years ago, and recently became vice president, and I helped run an A&R team. So it took me like a good 9 to 10 years to get there. But I pride myself in being someone who knows that everyone doesn't come in at the same level. Everyone doesn't come in with the same knowledge and having the same tools provided to them in life. So I think, one thing that we've been able to do with Women in Music is just realizing we have to like flatten the line for everyone, and each person in each group is very different. But from that, you learn through people's experiences and what they've gone through in life, how to have a more diverse and inclusive like workspace, organization, and voice. So happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Nikisha. Mary Beth, you want to tell us about you and your expertise?
Sure, awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I'm Mary Beth Ferrante. I'm the founder of Work360, and our organization focuses on bringing caretaking and parenting into the inclusion conversation. So we really work on supporting policies and corporate practices that enable people to pursue both their professional and their personal goals. I'm a mom. Shocking considering my work. So I have a 5-year-old and an almost 3-year-old. I'm, white, able-bodied, married, and mostly stable on medication. I'll give you that one. So that's always interesting. I think we need to be talking a lot more about mental health, especially now. So I think that's such an important part of this conversation. And I think I am the outsider. I come from a background in the financial industry, but really, found myself up against that maternal wall and really finding the challenges that we face as caregivers. And so how we can dive into that. And it's a challenge that is across literally every industry. And we work across a lot of industries in tech, creative agencies, music, financial, et cetera. And they all have very similar challenges. So I'm excited to kind of bring that benchmarking into this conversation too. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Maria, you want to go next?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Gironas. As far as how I identify, Latino. My parents are both immigrants from Bolivia. So I take a lot of pride being the product of their sacrifice for everything they've done for me in their life. And where I work is a Q&A. I'm the director of digital platform strategy. So my job is to be the relationship between the TikTok, Snapchats of the world for our artist roster across the human resources and the Q&A management side of our business. And then I guess beyond that as well, you know, I was thinking a lot about how I was going to say this, so I'll just be as honest as possible about it. I don't know if the word is bisexual, and I don't know if the word is queer. All I know is that I like guys and girls. I just don't know what the word is yet for me, but still figuring that out and still part of that journey for myself. So nice to meet everyone.
Thanks, Maria. And Jeff, the elusive white male on a women in music panel. Thank you for joining us. I asked Jeff to join us today because he's been such an ally and advocate for women in music, and I think does a really special job at connecting with people and making people feel seen and heard. And I'm sure as a leader does the same. So Jeff, take it away.
Well, thank you, appreciate it. Yeah, an honor to be here, and just great to hear everybody's story so far. As far as how I identify as a husband, a dad, a person of faith. I also identify as an entrepreneur, but also a dreamer. That's one of those things where I love taking a look at what's possible and just say, you know, why don't we focus more on that instead of, you know, what's not. So I think that's it. Also financial advisor, consultant. So we have some national practices on both those sides. But again, I just love hearing people's stories and saying, you know, what's that special purpose you were put on this earth for, and how do we help you figure out how to do that? So that's a bit of my journey. Part of my background was in the M&A, mergers and acquisition space. Prior to this, I used to lead some IT divisions and some different business units with aircraft engines and helicopters. So it's a wandering path to get to how I got here, but I've enjoyed every minute.
Well, thanks so much, Jeff. Thank you all so much for sharing. I'm going to pop a little infographic into our chat here just to make it easier. I would share this deck, but it's kind of boring and easier to do this. Privilege, power. Okay, so you can just download that if you wish to. There's this wheel. I'm a visual learner, so I like this. There's this wheel of power and privilege that I reference pretty often these days when I'm thinking about like where I fit in and who's missing from a conversation and who, you know, it's helpful to check in with and connect with in my own career, in my personal life. And I think that as a woman in music, I always kind of identified as being outside of the circle of power. And it turns out as a white woman who's like, you know, pretty basic around that curve, I'm actually in the middle of it. And so it's kind of interesting seeing stuff visually and realizing like where you fall and how you need to then use that power to help people on the outer spokes of that wheel. And so what I'd love to talk about with our panelists today is like, what does it mean to be in a workplace that's diverse and inclusive? Where have you felt included? What have been some things that have really worked that either colleagues or leaders have done to make you feel included? What have you seen maybe not work and need to be improved? And we'll go from there. Do you want to maybe, Camille, you want to kick off and we'll just rotate around?
Sure. So I think you're asking for me to start with my own inclusion journey, and then we can expand from there. I had the fortune of growing up in an environment where I had a mother that worked in corporate for 30 years. So I was listening to conversations mostly of West Indian women, of all of the ups and downs and challenges of navigating an organization that was 100 years old. And then I ended up getting an internship there. And then I ended up getting a job there. So one of the places of privilege I've sat in is that I understand how to navigate in corporate. I also went to a lot of schools and were environments where I was the only one. So it was not uncomfortable for me to sit in those spaces and for people to receive me because I was able to speak their language and I was comfortable and safe for them. So the ways that I've been able to yield that power is that I have the opportunity to push back because they've let me in on the inner circle. I just moved into a position right now where I was the first VP in an organization that's 35 years old. And that's challenging, but that's part of my job. So I can't complain too much. It's to change that. But I think what's interesting about what you said is that sometimes without really thinking about it, you may position yourself or others may position you in different places, and really recognizing where you do have privilege and power, and being able to use that to support the experience. And I just think of the translation over to the industry and how many people don't have exposure to how the industry works, to how to navigate and move, and sort of what giving that that extra boost can do, even if you are sitting on the margins in other identity spaces.
Amazing. Nikisha, how about your experience? You're at APG Atlantic, so we've heard, anecdotally, I've heard that Atlantic is a particularly inclusive place in a lot of ways, and some kind of stories from people who work there who really do appreciate a lot of what the company tries to do, at least for employees.
Yeah, I think comparing my feelings of inclusivity versus being at a major corporation is probably different because I started about 10 years ago. And so I started off not even knowing you could have a job in music. Like, I went to school in Missouri. I moved to New York to play music, to be a bass player. And so, from there, I found out that, you could actually work at a label, that's a music thing is a job, but that's not something I learned in middle school, high school, as a young Black woman in St. Louis. And so, the person who hired me as an intern was another Black woman. And so from that, I learned that, you kind of had to pay it forward. And so, as an assistant, there are a fair mix of, executives that are Black, people of color, and white. But I noticed those that, kind of had the inner track moved a little bit faster. So I made it sure to always seek out interns. I would always do women, and I would always do women who, for me, felt like had the same journey as me, where they didn't necessarily know that music could be an option, but they know that interning at a label could be cool. And so I was very, intentional about doing that. And then, again, I think my journey is very different because one thing that I learned is that no matter what you have, no matter where you come from, you treat people with respect, no matter if it's the intern or the CEO. So I always, felt like I could speak up for myself, even if it was in a position where I shouldn't, which, thinking back, there are a few times where I definitely shouldn't have said anything. Traditionally you let, the executives have the final word. But I think that's something that also allowed people to learn my style of leadership. So, my team that reports to me now feels very open in sharing information with me. Like I said, there's no, just because I'm, you report to me doesn't mean, we can't have a conversation or my word is final say. I make sure that, I'm open to all viewpoints and aspects, and realize, as me starting, I didn't have the same path, and I don't expect people to have the same path as me, but I do expect people to be willing to have a conversation, to understand another person's viewpoint and their journey, and to, knowing that if we want to change the industry, we have to be intentional and diverse with those who we allow to come into our circle and those who we bring in. Because now that I sit, I'm at a little bit higher level, and it's pretty white up here compared to, when I was like a director or a manager. Once you get to VP, EVP, it's a very white space. So just making sure that my voice is heard and they understand my perspective, and making sure, I pull back again to pull up that next young Black woman who's starting as an intern, who has a dream of being a vice president or running an A&R team. I hope I answered you. I think I got a little carried away.
Good. Thanks, Nikki. Maria, you want to tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, totally. I think as far as what my inclusion journey has been, I think I can honestly say Q&A has been the first company where I never felt too white or too brown, if that makes sense at all for some. And I guess to like kind of put it into perspective, like I've occupied a lot of white space in my career so far. And, you know, when you occupy a lot of white space, being Latino, there's kind of a lot of questions that could pop up like, oh, like, what's the Latino perspective on this? Or like, what is your like thought on like this Hispanic Heritage Month? Like, that's kind of when my perspective would suddenly matter at times, you know, and I don't think it was any fault to any of the company I worked for previously or anything. I think it's just inclusion is a process and it's work, you know, so it takes it's not meant to take a long time, but it takes a lot of like thoughtfulness and intention to, you know, really make the process done right. And as far as where I stand now, as what inclusion looks like at Q&A, I'm just really proud to work for a company that is a Black-owned business and work for people that all have, you know, we're immigrants, you know, we have over 50% of our company's women. And also I think even beyond that, like some people have never, Troy himself dropped out of high school when he was 16. I have a BA, one of our other co-founders, you know, never even went to school. It's just really amazing to be in a melting pot of individuals who all appreciate perspective because it's just how we do it. I think something Susie said when I first started the job, like Q&A, like the people when we hire them, it's not meant to like, we're not meant to like hire people that are our culture. We're meant to add to our culture. Like we're not trying to find a type. We're just trying to find people that, you know, can help continue to improve it, to provide perspective for it, and to continue to create space, frankly. So I think that's a little bit of my journey.
Awesome. Mary Beth, you do work specifically around parenting and making sure that companies can be more inclusive and flexible around the journey of parents, which I can attest is like a real challenge, especially during a pandemic. So tell us a little bit about how you got into that work and kind of what in, you know, I know you know all the stats as well on like how people feel supported at work, how they don't, parents or not. So shed a little light for us on your side of things.
Yeah, I mean, so how I started this work is I had a baby and it was really difficult, right? I think I grew up in the financial industry, right? Which is very traditional, very old boys club, very also like one path. This is what you do to get to the next level. And there's no kind of like defaulting outside of that realm. And so I think for me, what was the big driver was not necessarily the organization or even the policies, but it's so much more about who is your direct leader, who are the people on your team that you're surrounded by. And in my experience, you know, I was on a team of all, you know, white men, all ex-McKinsey consultant men too, which is their very own breed. And you know,
so I understand.
Yeah, so similar, right? Yeah, and I had an executive who didn't even share with us that his wife was pregnant with their second child and took only a couple days off of work when that baby was born. And so I think that really just opened up for me this understanding that it's so much more about the relationships that you're creating, about kind of that in, you know, what's the experience that you're having with your direct team, with your direct leader. And even though I worked for a company that was, you know, in all the best places to work on paper, if my, you know, immediate team and direct leaders didn't have that same perspective, I kind of felt dead out of water, right? Like it just felt like there was no possibility to move forward. That's what really shifted me into this work. And I just went real deep, real fast. And you know, I think what we're recognizing is that this is a challenge across industries. You know, the Women in the Workplace study, one of the things that I actually found the most fascinating, well, there were so many things fascinating out of that report as always, but one key piece was this idea that organizations think that, you know, 75% of their leaders are checking in with their employees, but only 39% of employees feel like they're being checked in on, right? And that's such this huge gap around the policy and what the company is setting up and what's actually happening in those day-to-day interactions, and what flexibility really means for, you know, for all of us who are in this kind of crazy pandemic, and how we shift the ways that we work. And so I think that's a lot of what we're trying to focus on as we go into the future, you know, knowing that we're not ever going back to some sort of normal, is how can we actually shift those dynamics.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm also putting in the chat that Women in Work 2020 study that has a lot of great information, also McKinsey job. And I think is a really great example of kind of taking a look at how people kind of rate their quality of inclusion at work. I'm also going to type into this chat, which I hope it works, our Berkeley study. So we did a study with Berklee College of Music to kind of see where women in the music industry stood and how they rated their own satisfaction at work. And so you can take a look through that as well, and we'll get a little bit more into that info later. But Jeff, do you want to tell us, as a leader, like, how do you, you know, in our work together, I've noticed how great you are, as I mentioned, at like checking in and being intentional with how you make everyone feel seen and heard, and just respected and included. Can you just like tell us a little bit about how you as a leader do that, and how you kind of came to operate that way? It's still pretty rare.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I think part of it just kind of stemmed from, you know, a bit of how I grew up. I grew up around some just amazing folks. You know, I looked at, for example, my mom. She graduated from high school at 14, but was told, here's a lot of things you can't do. And I looked at that, and, you know, somewhere over the years, she's ended up studying 800 credit hours of law and has successfully defended cases while not being an attorney, but helping others out. You know, I saw that kind of skill set. But, you know, she would tell the stories of how, you know, in the 60s, she would go and try to buy property, and they'd say, well, where's your husband? And she's like, well, I don't need a husband to buy my own property. And they're like, oh, yeah, you do. And I'd hear these kinds of stories, and I've seen similar stories as well with my wife. I think Maria is similar to your story. You know, she has a fascinating background. You know, her mom is Filipino and Spanish, and her dad was from the French Caribbean. So she has this remarkable beauty that looks like everywhere we go. But at the same time, she commented on the same things of saying, you know, everywhere she went, you know, when she was growing up in certain places of the world, she was too light skinned, certain places too dark skinned, but went on to, you know, retire as a lieutenant colonel with the Air Force and go on to do some amazing things. And just, you know, a fabulous gift to me to be able to have somebody who has this remarkable worldview. And so I looked at that and just came across more and more of those experiences. And I kept looking around saying, you know, the leaders that had the greatest impressions on me, I kept noticing an awful lot of them came from very diverse experiences. They were not the cookie cutter. They were not, you know, as Mary Beth, as you mentioned, from that old boys club. They just had this interesting path, and that's what fascinated me, of saying, okay, I want to learn more. And to that end, there's certain things you see and you say, you know what, there's always something to be learned from each experience. And sometimes you learn that's definitely not the way I want to do it. And in other cases, there are these great ways of folks showing that kind of leadership. And to me, I think it comes down to, I think someone mentioned something like this earlier. I think, Nikisha, this was you. You mentioned this whole idea of it doesn't matter who it is, you know, treat everyone with that level of respect. And one of those great quotes that has always stood out to me is, this is the final test of a gentleman, their respect for someone who can be of no possible service to them. And along the way, we've just had these amazing opportunities to meet fascinating people by just saying, tell us your story, tell us where you want to go. And as we start to hear those, then it becomes this amazing opportunity to connect people and say, well, I may not be able to help you on that, but I know somebody who can. I know Nicole, I know Nikisha, I know these other folks who can be these incredible connectors. Let's help put you in contact with them. And that to me is just the fun part of saying, you know what, if you do this thing right, it's very much like drafting. If you think about cycling, or race car driving, whatever you prefer. All of a sudden, if you can get all of those things in alignment, it just becomes so much easier because now folks can follow just like geese do. You know, they follow, and then somebody rotates up to the front and continues to sort of serve as that windbreak for everyone else. And that way it propels everybody forward instead of one person having to win or one person and everybody else having to lose. I don't believe that's the way the world can and should operate. Everybody has that chance, and I think it's our job to help them find out why were they put on this earth and how to do more of it.
And that's a great point. I think that, you know, part of the pandemic, especially for music industry, which is like a very ego-driven business, you know, we like exist to promote artists and other creative. And so I think the one thing that has been kind of changed shape of the industry a little bit is that like those walls have broken down a bit and we are all seeing everyone's circumstance at home. So like where I used to feel out of that circle of power in a way that like if my daughter were at home, I had to be at home with her for a day, I would feel really anxious about getting on calls because I knew that I was going to be distracted. I wasn't going to be able to work as focused. And now it's like, well, this is what it is. And it's the same for everyone, you know, at varied levels of what you have going on in your own personal life. And so that hopefully will change a little bit the shape of things going forward. What I heard a couple of you say also is like the really getting to know people one-on-one and making, you know, knowing what makes someone tick is something else I think hopefully that will come out of this time that we all spend virtually seeing each other rather than just being on phones and stuff, is like understanding the person more and getting to relate to that person a little bit better and making sure that you're remembering things about that person that you can check in with and make them feel included and that you like understand and see and hear them more. Another thing that I read about the other day was the use of social media and how you use social media to kind of share your perspective. And I think that one thing I've seen, and I'd love to hear your perspectives on this, is one of my artists who I work with, I know that he's a super progressive, inclusive person, but the things that I see him sharing more and more on social media have to do a lot with women's rights and other forms of kind of advocacy on behalf of underrepresented groups. And that has made me a lot more open to sharing things in my own personal life with him. So as a leader, like how, you know, what do you like to see from people you work with? Is that a way that people can advocate and really show what they believe in? And how does that make you feel working with those colleagues? You know, if I see, like I was on a Zoom the other day with someone who I had an enormous amount of respect for before COVID, like would never see his home life and his living room. And his kids are running around in the back like lunatics, you know? And I was like, this is amazing because like, you're off that pedestal now and I feel more connected. And I just feel like it's a really great opportunity in those moments to kind of share who we are and what we believe in ways that kind of empower the people around us to also be able to share. So like in a perfect world for everyone here, what are ways that your colleagues and employers and friends can act day to day that make us all feel more connected? And how can we kind of take those things and make them a toolkit going forward for if and when we do go back to work as normal, what we want to see our companies and our colleagues doing day to day to really make action and take action to make the workplace culture day to day more inclusive, more empowering, so that we feel like we're thriving.
Yeah, I'll jump in there, Nicole, because it's a good lead into something I wanted to share. So I spend a lot of time building policies and practices, working on getting data, building plans for leaders so they can execute. And all of that work has been distilled down to one concept, and that's psychological safety. And that's something that you can exercise as a friend, as a colleague, as a leader. And in a minute, I'll share an organization that I really like the way they broke it down into sort of 4 buckets. So one is around creating a sense of belonging and acceptance. So whether that's posting something that shows that you're in your understanding of issues that are outside of your direct experience, or making sure that if somebody's new to an organization and that you are a coach to them and help them get acclimated. And I, as somebody who's onboarding during this era, that's especially important for me. Giving people permission to make mistakes is the next thing. So when someone fails and they come from a group where they feel like they're already working extra hard to prove that they belong in that space, their mistakes are so loud to them. So how can you provide air cover and support and let them know that that's an opportunity to grow? Giving them chances to add value, not just from what their talent is and their skill set, but also where their passion space is. And then lastly, this is the hardest one, is creating enough trust where they can challenge you and push back on an idea and say, this doesn't work for me, or I think there's another way the team should go. So a lot of what I've been trying to do in my personal life, but also professionally, is move in this space of psychological safety.
That's such a great point. And Nikisha, that's a little bit of what you touched upon. It's like being the kind of leader who people can come to and challenge, and that you're open to that. And sharing all of the things that you support so that your colleagues know that they can come to you. I think that the point about making mistakes is such a good one, because I think that's like the white whale for people, not knowing, like thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this wrong, so I just don't know if I'm going to do it, or I'm not going to do it as actively. And like, I have one moment where I worked at this co-working space, and there was someone who did not identify with a gender who I adore and spoke to every day. And one morning I came in, and it's an all-female co-working space, was supposed to be, and then that's not legal. So they took non-identifying or male members. I'm sure you know it. They are in turmoil now. But so I walked in one morning and I said, hey, ladies, to the people behind the counter in the cafe. And my friend who was non-identifying was amongst that group of 4 people. And I realized that I had said, hey, ladies. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm such an a-hole. And in the moment, I knew I would fumble over my words because I wasn't exactly sure how to apologize. And then I took a step back after that and went up to them and messaged them privately to say, I'm so sorry that I gendered you. I didn't mean to do that. It just was me, like, you know, being used to saying, hey guys, or hey ladies, or whatever it is, and apologizing. But for the 2 hours before I was able to make that apology, I was like freaking out, because I was like, I'm so awful. Like, I can't believe I did that. That was so irresponsible of me and so not inclusive. And I texted one of my friends who's the director of diversity and inclusion at Columbia University. And I said, oh my gosh, what do I do? I'm just like, I feel so horrible. And she was like, just apologize. Like, what are you talking about? What do you do? And I was like, no, I know, but like, what can I say? And she's like, just say, I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. You know, like, it's not a big deal. We all make mistakes. Like, this isn't a space where you have to like get everything right. And that's the point. Like, you're not going to get it right. Women in Music has made great strides in trying to be more diverse and inclusive, but we have so far to go as an organization. And, you know, companies are, you know, coming up with different ways to kind of try to be more diverse and inclusive, but have so far to still go. And the point is, like, as long as we're working every day, right, and trying to set those standards and meet those standards. Thanks, Camila, so much for outlining those ways that people can really dig in.
So too, for leaders to realize, like, the whole mistake thing, like, mistakes happen, like, see a mistake as a learning process, a learning experience, because you learn from the mistake. Like, I made a mistake today, you know, how I communicated with someone, but I realized a phrase that they say has a different meaning. I interpret it differently, and it was a mistake on my end because I had a different experience with the wording. So just, you know, being confident to know that a mistake is just a chance to teach, a learning opportunity, you know, to learn from it and to know moving forward, you know, so that less mistakes are made. I think also too, one thing that we saw, you know, when the protests were happening, like, we saw a lot of companies give off days, which I wish there would be more of that, more time for, like, you know, just for the employees to have space and to have time to process what's going on in the world, especially right now. So I think, you know, I definitely would love to see more of that from companies, from employers, offering more time for people to just have mental health days, you know, that aren't necessarily lumped into vacation days. I think that's one way too that we can drive toward, like, a more diverse and inclusive, and even people just coming back feeling refreshed.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just wanted to, oh, sorry, does someone have something?
I just want to say
Mike,
something
sure.
real quick.
We all had this.
I'm really passionate about this point here. So yes, and you have so many people who have stepped up to do work, particularly in employee networks. They should be compensated. They should have been paid from the beginning. Any work outside of their day-to-day, it's driving your business, it's driving your culture. They saved you this summer. So in compensation for employee networks. Thank you. I'm done.
Maria, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna bring it back to the point of just like opportunity of learning and growth as far as like learning from these instances in your life. The one that just came to mind when I was talking is like, I guess like for me, there was a professor I had in college. I was in an environmental literature class. I'll never forget it. I mean, I went to Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and if you know anything about that school, it's 89% white. Literally, the statistic is on their website, and nothing wrong with that. It's but I think in the class, I had a professor. We were just discussing, John Wimber and something about his writings, and then he turns to me, he's like, "What's your perspective on it?" And then I at first I thought it was because I just wasn't like talking enough in the class that day. And but he specifies like, no, I want the Latino perspective. And it was one of those moments where it was honestly probably the first time as an adult where I like realized how direct that inquiry was. And it took me like I think all semester, but finally I like went up to him and I was like, hey, I just want to let you know, like, just with as much grace as possible. I didn't feel super comfortable with the way that was asked, let alone just like being directed like that. And, at the time they kind of like took this information and were obviously very apologetic. But it was actually about a year ago, I got an email randomly on my through LinkedIn. And the professor just reached out. I was like, hey, I've done a lot of reflecting over the time due to BLM movement and things like that. And I just wanted you to know that I'm just so sorry again. And I was just like everyone just processes all this growth in such different ways. And it just meant a lot to me to just, have someone, something I haven't thought of in many years, just come kind of back around in a really lovely way.
That's so great. Thanks for sharing that.
I think well, Nicole, I think as well, a couple of thoughts I had to your question there around, how we can advocate to be more inclusive. And one of the things there that, I've really enjoyed and appreciated is the fact that I don't want everybody to have the same viewpoint I have, because at that point, at least one of us is redundant, and I'm pretty sure that's me. And so as a result of that, why don't we go get this diversity of opinions? Because I regularly tell folks on our teams, whether it's now or prior positions, look, if I have to be the generator of all good ideas, we're doomed. And so we need to make sure that we're getting as many great ideas in as possible. And so we can make the best possible solution instead of one that, could be suboptimal. And so I think taking a look at that, I think the ideas of mentoring and saying, hey, look, as Nikisha was talking about earlier, and, whether it's someone that has a similar path as you have or someone who has not, I think that's incumbent upon all of us to say, hey, look, I see something in you. You have talent, you have ability, you have a vision. How can I help you forward? Because each of us has had somebody along the way that has said they saw something in us. And I think it's incumbent upon us to pass that along. And I think as well, the other thing too is, some of the ways that we can advocate for that kind of change in our spaces. One of the things we've worked to do is as we bring people on board, we say, okay, generally, this is the thing that we need to have done in this particular role. But go design it. Go design it so that you love 80% of what it is you're doing. And if you look at this at the end of that design and say, I don't love this, then it may not be the right role for you. But I want you to take it and run with it so that every day you have that opportunity to say, well, I get to go to work instead of I ought to go to work. It is a totally different feeling if you feel like, man, I love what I'm doing. And occasionally there's that paperwork stuff that has to get done. But man, if you can do what you love to do, then it doesn't feel like work. And that is one of those things where folks can be genuinely who they are. They're not having to impersonate someone else that they feel like they have to fit a mold, but can genuinely bring their best self to work and to their other relationships as well. Because if you're not happy at work, then it carries over everywhere else.
So true. And such a great point, Jeff. And it also like helps the business, right? Like we're all so much more productive when we're happy and we feel empowered to do the work, and feel supported in doing it. So such a great point. Mary Beth, tell us a little bit about like how employers and colleagues and teams can support parents during this, excuse my language, shit show that is parenting and teaching from home.
Absolutely. Well, one, I just wanted to also touch on Camilla's point on paying for employee resource groups, because as someone who led an employee resource group for about 8 years, let me tell you, I spent so many hours, and I would have loved to have gotten some sort of compensation. I think that's a huge shift, and we just saw Twitter announce that recently, that they're going to be doing that. So we're hoping to see kind of more movement in that direction. So always exciting to see kind of what the tech industry is doing, is they tend to be a leader in a lot of these places. And especially, I think even in parenting, I've kind of put things into 2 buckets, right? We need to stop the bleeding right now, and then we need to prepare for the future. And stopping the bleeding right now is very different in terms of the benefits and the support, because people really do need care support right now. They need help in their homes or in their schools. They need flexibility in a completely different way, because, my little one is currently in preschool, but like that could get shut down for 2 weeks or a month at any moment kind of coming up. And so I think really putting in place opportunities to have continual dialogue around what that looks like. And, we've seen some organizations increase time off. They have increased subsidies for childcare. They have increased backup care benefits, things like this that I think are really important around stopping the bleeding. I think when we think about the next phase, it really is about shifting, how we're working, and gets into much more around flexibility for people to pursue kind of what they want, both personally and professionally, and recognizing that care isn't just kids, right? It's for ourselves, it's for our families, it's for our, elderly, it's for even our good friends. And so, I think a lot, Nikisha, you spoke about kind of that time off. And I think that is a critical component of making sure that we're giving permission for people to take time for care. So whether that's caring for the birth of a new child or adoption, or whether that's caring for, an elderly parent or anything around the spectrum, including caring for ourselves, right? We're seeing this so increasingly with the pandemic that too many people in this country don't even have paid time off. And so are literally put in a position of, can I feed my family? Can I feed myself? Or can I take the time off that I need to recover and care for myself? So, a lot of what we're focusing on as we move into the future is how do we create that flexibility and also that protected time for people so that they can make sure that they're caring for themselves and their families in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any other last points anyone needs to make? Because we only have 3 minutes. I was hoping we could do some Q&A. Any closing thoughts? Well, a couple of things we talked about just to kind of give some highlights, checking in with your colleagues and employees and friends, and really listening, and amplifying voices of people outside of that power circle, right? To make sure that we're really connecting at work, and creating an empowered workplace culture where everyone feels valued, and connecting in ways that like shows your own personality and your own passion, so that the people you work with can connect on those levels as well, whether it be social media or otherwise, kind of explaining and kind of wearing on your sleeve a little bit more the things you care about and support, to create, Camilla, what was the word you used?
Which one?
Psychological safety.
You're creating
Psychological safety.
Psychological safety.
Yes.
And if you read through any of that Berkeley study, I'll put it in the link again. A lot of that data was around kind of feeling safe in the workplace. I think both psychologically and physically. So I just love that thought to create that psychological safety for teams. Can everyone, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to send out in our newsletter and Women in Music on Monday. All of our members get a newsletter every Monday. We're going to put links to everyone who spoke on the panel tonight so that you can learn more about everyone's individual work and connect with them. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for speaking, everyone, and sharing your perspectives. Thank you, JJ and the Music Biz team for having us.